I'll give a little background about myself for my story. I'm a young gay male living in a medium-sized city. The dating scene is rather limited, and most gay people use apps or websites for meeting others for encounters or dates. I frequent websites and apps daily just to see if there's anyone new out there that I haven't already spoken to. Yet I rarely actually meet anyone from online. The fear of getting hurt or being robbed has always been in the back of my mind, so I generally just browse without ever actually meeting anybody. Around 6 months ago, while browsing Craigslist, I found an ad that seemed to be somewhat what I was looking for. The ad was by a man a little older than myself, who seemed to want the same things that I wanted. He wanted to meet up with a guy my age and get to know one over drinks, maybe a little cuddle session, and whatever else may follow, and not just a quickie kind of thing. After responding to the ad, the guy and I talked for about a month through texting without ever making plans of meeting. I finally got the confidence and asked if he wanted to meet. He agreed, and we decided that I would drive to his place, which was about 10 miles from me and out of the city limits. The day that we decided to meet, it was getting late, about 6 p.m. The sun was still somewhat out, but it was getting darker. I got in my car and drove out to the area where he lived. The guy texted me and said that he would be walking on the side of the road because he was coming back from visiting with a friend, and just asked that I pick him up to go back to his place. He told me before that he had 2 kids that lived with him, but that the kid's mother wasn't in the picture. He says that his kids were at a friend's house and he would be back later, so we would have the place to ourselves. While making my way to the guy's house, I saw him walking on the side of the road. He was holding a large speaker and covered in a hoodie, which seemed strange because it wasn't cold at all where we live. The road that we were on was very much outside the city lines, on a dirt road with random trailers set up every acre or so. I stopped the car and said something friendly like, "Hey stranger, need a ride?" He didn't smile. He just opened the door and got into my car without saying a word. I thought that this was odd because we literally spent a month having friendly chats, and I figured that he would act happy to see me, or at least not awkward about it. After picking him up and making my way to his house, he then tells me to turn around and go back to the main road. He wanted to get a blunt and some alcohol so that we could chill together. So, not thinking anything strange at this point, I agree and head back the other way. While on this long dirt road with no streetlights, he mentions that his power is out at his house and asked if that's okay with me. I was slightly thrown off by this, but I said, sure, as long as you have candles or something. He didn't say anything, just kept looking straight ahead like I never said anything. I then thought, what about your kids? How are children living in a house with no power? And so I asked him, and this is where things started to get very strange. He replied, "Oh, they're staying with my mom for a while. But he just told me a few days ago that his kids lived with him with no mother." And questions ran through my mind, but I didn't feel like I was in trouble yet. We arrived at the store and he got out with his face and head covered like he was hiding from somebody. This seemed strange. And then he got back in the car after making his purchase. While traveling back to his place, which was about a 15-minute drive, he then told me, I had to sling drugs to get money for this so we could hang out tonight. I was very surprised and shocked when he randomly told me this. The situation was getting sketchy, so I asked if he had any protection, just in case we decide that we needed them. He said no, so I dropped him off at another store nearby before starting our journey down the long dirt road. After inconsistent and strange behaviors coming from the guy, I was just really wanting to get out of this situation as fast as I could at this point. I dropped him off at the local grocery store to pick up protection, thinking this could be my out. I could just drive away and block his number and be done with the situation. After he walked into the store, I was trying to figure out what to do at this point. I wanted to just drive away, but I didn't want to just leave somebody stranded. I finally got the nerve to leave, but his huge speaker was sitting in my floorboard. I wanted nothing connecting me with this person, and feared that he might possibly say that I stole the speaker. So I got out of my car, ran to the passenger side, opened the door and started dragging the speaker from the car, and I heard, "What are you doing?" It was him, and he was right behind me. Fear ran through my body like I had been caught stealing something or lying about a bad grade to my parents. I told him, "Oh, I was going to move this to the back seat so you would have more room in the car." A quick save, and he seemed to have bought my horrible explanation. But now he's here in my car and my only out is gone. We're driving down the old, dark, dirt road, and all that's going through my mind is, how do I get out of this alive? I'm trying to catch him in another lie to see if this is actually happening or just my imagination, but I can't seem to get any information out of him. He just sits beside me, looking straight ahead, fidgeting with something in his pockets, as though he has a mission to complete, and I'm just here to bring it to him. After driving about 15 minutes down the dirt road, I noticed that there are no longer trailers. The road is pitch black, only lit up by my headlights. I then ask him if his place is coming up, because the navigation said it should be right here. He tells me, "Oh, the address that I gave you is an old business. My address doesn't show up on Google Maps for some reason." Red alert. I started panicking, just knowing that I was about to be robbed or killed in a few moments. I slowed the car down and just thought of anything that could get me out at this point. I told him that my best friend was waiting for me to get back to have drinks with her. I said that I didn't realize we would be driving so much and that it would take this long. I'm not sure if he bought the excuse or not, but I told him that I texted my friend the address he gave me so she would know how long I would be out, and when to expect me back for our planned night out. He seemed to trust my explanation, but was very irritated. He said to me, "Well, can't we just have a little car fun real quick right here? Nobody lives out here, so nobody will even see us." I said, "No, I'm sorry, my friend is going to be pissed and she's already called me when you were in the store." I told her that I would only be about 30 minutes and be back in time for drinks. I was ready to abandon my car at this point to be pulled out a knife or anything other than a gun. But luckily, he just kind of huffed, got out of my car and slammed the door, and started to put his head in the window to tell me something. I quickly hit the gas and turned the wheel, leaving nothing but a smoke cloud behind me. I couldn't see him in the rearview mirror due to the darkness of the night, but I imagine he might have been flipping me off or coughing from the dust plume made by my tires. After pulling myself together and realizing that I might have been the next Oprah story, I called my friend who wasn't waiting for me, my mom, my sister, everyone that I loved, and told them a slimmed version of the story that took place that night. I teared up a little thinking that I could have almost died, but I overcame that pretty quickly. When I got home that night, I decided to pull up the address he gave me. I noticed that about 2 miles down the road, there was one house sitting alone with no neighbors. The road was a dead end. I then used Google Street View and saw that the house was completely abandoned with no doors and dirty walls. I googled the actual address of that house and found that it was posted for sale about 5 years ago and was still on the market. I'm guessing nobody wants to purchase a possible drug house. My friends told me later that they imagined that he wanted to get me to the house and do whatever he wanted, since there is no traffic that far down the road. I'm sure it would take quite a while to find a body that went missing. After all of this, I vowed to never meet anyone from Craigslist ever again, unless it's in a police parking lot. I did vow to just never leave my house, but school and work have made that impossible. All in all, I'm okay with what happened, but it really brought to light what could happen when you least suspect it. I was 18 years old and was looking for a place to move in before I started my first semester of college, since living about 2 hours away in the backwoods wasn't very practical. The first place I looked into was great. Safe area, close to my job location, 10 minutes from school, etc. The only issue was when I went to sign up for the place. Pricing had gone up significantly since they last updated their website. Not knowing this, I put down my non-refundable deposit and was out $850 in less than 2 hours. Ouch. So now I'm out a significant chunk of money, set to start my new job in less than a week and have no place to move into. Here comes my mom with an idea. Look for a room to rent on Craigslist. I know, stupid, but I was desperate and she just wanted to help. After browsing, I found a room available for rent that was within my price range and decided to scope out the place. I met with my soon-to-be roommate, who we'll call B. B was a gay man, yes, it's important, in his early 30s. He was new to the area, a born-again Christian, very laid back and just seemed like a cool guy in general. I met him with my mother and stepfather, none of us getting a weird vibe from him, and after he showed me the room and private bathroom, and we decided to go for it. The only thing my stepdad insisted on was installing a slide lock on the door before I moved in. I handed B my deposit and he handed me my keys, telling me to go ahead and start moving in my things. Less than 48 hours later, I was moved in and waving bye to my parents. The morning I moved in, B wasn't there. No biggie, it was a Sunday morning and I assumed he was at church or something. Lunchtime rolled around and I figured a Sunday brunch. Afternoon came by and I sent him a text. Evening I called, no answer. 8 p.m., 10 p.m., nothing. Finally, I got tired and decided, screw it. One last text and I'm going to bed. Around 1 a.m., I woke up to someone knocking on the front door. It took me a second to remember where I was, but once I did, I was curious if B ever made it home. The knocking continued and I thought maybe B forgot his house key or something, and I came out into the living room to open the door. B wasn't on the other side. It was a thin lady with ratty brown hair looking around confused. One of the first things I noticed was she was in a dirty t-shirt. It was late December and like 32 degrees outside. I'd been around enough druggies in my day to know she was probably gacked out. Regardless, I smiled and talked. Hi, can I help? Is B here? She interrupted me and stuck her head through the door to look inside. I don't think so, he hasn't been here all day. Are you a friend of his? I'm actually really worried about him. She suddenly shoved past me and into the house before answering. No, he won't answer my text or calls. Where's he at? I don't know, ma'am. Your guess is as good as mine. I chuckled nervously, legit worried that my new roommate could be dead or hurt somewhere and no one knows it. She looked back to the doorway and I followed her gaze and almost shit bricks. A giant man steps through the doorway. He was a very dark, complected black man wearing our dark clothing, black jeans, a black turtleneck, black boots. He was standing a bit behind her on the porch, and this guy was tall, like really tall. He barely looked like he fit through the door without having to duck under. The woman starts pacing around the living room, asking me again and again if I knew where B was. Before she got too carried away, the man told her they should sit down and chill for a minute before guiding her to sit down with him on the couch. I cautiously sat across from them on the love seat across the room. From here on, I'll call the girl CL and the guy BA. After a pace or two of awkward silence, I try to make small talk with the two of them, asking them how they knew B, their names, and don't remember them, where they're from, etc. Trying to use what southern hospitality I have to make the situation better, hoping that it doesn't get out of hand and dangerous. I quickly realized BA was sober, and didn't seem to have anything going on with him like what the chick did. He stayed cool and level with me the entire time he had a hand firmly gripped on CL's shoulder. All of a sudden, CL jumps up and says that she has to use the bathroom. I told her where my bathroom was, and she quickly told me that she wanted to use B's instead. I argued a bit, telling her I wasn't comfortable with her doing that since he wasn't home. She ignored me and went towards the back of the house where B's room, and I assumed the master bath, shutting the room's door behind her. B.A. leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and just stared at me for a while, looking me over and honestly making me a bit nervous. Easy, since I was already a bit on edge. He finally spoke after a long pause. "What are you doing here, girl?" "I moved up here for college." "How old are you?" "How old do I look?" "I guess something in the early mid-20 range." I told him I was 18. He cursed, sounding legit concerned. "You're not from around here." Not a question, a fact. He knew that I was in over my head, that I was uncomfortable and questioning what I was even doing in that house with two strangers at 1 a.m., and that I was honestly afraid. "Do you know about B's past?" When I told him no, B.A. unleashed a whole load of information to me. B used to do drugs like hard stuff. He's new to the area due to his drug issues, and that's how he knew CL. B is supposedly clean now except for the occasional thing. All this stuff I figured honestly. B looked like he had lived a rougher life, and I wasn't going to judge him for his past. B.A. sighed and asked me something I wasn't expecting. "You haven't done anything with him, right?" Obviously no, he was gay. "Needles or nothing?" Again no, I was clean. "Good, gonna be real with you. B's got it, so be careful, alright? Guy should have told you. Also, I ain't sure, but I think he gets his money from doing some bad stuff. So keep your head down until you get the heck out." CL came back into the living room then, and BA stood up and told her that they were leaving. She put up a bit of a fight about it, but he quickly escorted her through the hallway, yelling at her to shut up and wait in the car. Before he left, he told me that I wasn't safe there. Told me to leave, be smart, stay in school, and be better than all of them. He wished me good night and shut the door. I jumped up and locked it. Not gonna lie, I had a meltdown panic attack. Welcome to the city, kid. Next morning, B was home. He asked if someone was over. I identified the woman and told me that she had raided his medicine cabinet last night. Told me that it was okay, but to never let anyone in if they mention his name. Said people will come around that he doesn't want around. Told me that he was going out and he left for the day. The next 2 days kind of blurred together, so my apologies. I figured out B's job the next night when I heard him open the back door into his house with a hookup. The guy left. I heard B tell him that he can't use the front door and to go through the backyard. And this repeated, I kid you not, around 5 times that night, until I finally left my room to pee, and I see a guy leaning over the kitchen counter. The dude spun around to see me standing there and quickly adjusted his pants while cursing. B straightened himself from his kneeling position a few seconds later. The guy opened his wallet, handed B some cash, and left out the back door. Great. I went back to my room and called my best friend and her husband, crying and wanting out. They were staying at a hotel in town that night and invited me to come stay with them. I moved back home again until I found a new place. No more Craigslist ads, no more strange roommates. I was out another 800s from the B situation, and so I felt even more defeated. B knew what he was doing. He knew that he was putting me in danger by lying to me and bringing me into that situation. B.A. got his nickname because that's what he became to me, an angel. If he never would have warned me that night, I could have been in real trouble, and possibly even gotten sick because of this reckless behavior about this guy that I lived with. I would love to meet B.A. again and thank him, but not B. Him and CL can do their own thing, far, far away from me. About 2 years ago, I moved into a new apartment. The walls were very thin, and because of the fire safety laws in my city, my bedroom had one window which led into the living room, and none with outside access. The window will be important later. It was 3 bedrooms, one for me, one for the master tenant, and one spare, which at the time was rented out by a pretty friendly guy. Well, the friendly guy had issues with his work visa, and had to move back to Canada last minute, leaving us about 2 weeks to find another roommate. Our quickest and easiest option was Craigslist. Due to my work schedule, I had no part in the selection process, but I was content when the new roommate moved in a little later. He seemed a bit off but friendly. He was a very tall, large guy but pretty quiet, and not someone I wanted to go out of my way to hang out with, but I was okay to be around and be cordial with. About 2 weeks into his move-in, the master tenant left for Hawaii, leaving him and I alone in the home for a month-long duration of his stay. For the first few days, things are pretty normal. All of a sudden, about 4 days into the trip, I am woken up about 8 a.m. to a frantic knocking at my door. My roommate, we'll call him Kyle, is standing there when I open up, looking frazzled. He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "So, do you want to tell me what went on last night?" To which I was shocked and confused because I had come home from work at about 9 p.m. and immediately showered and went to bed. I explained this to him and he tells me that he heard me screaming and arguing with someone in my room, that he saw me in the side alley out the window, arguing with our landlord, whom I had never even seen at that point, that he heard people coming in and out of our house. I tell him no way, none of that ever happened. After staring at me for a little longer, he leaves and he doesn't bring it up again. The next morning, I wake up to the same thing. This time, he says that he saw me arguing with my boyfriend. I was single at the time. Had seen me talking with our other roommate, who's in Hawaii, and asking me for the badge number of the officer that I had spoken to, since he had apparently seen me talking to a bunch of police as well. This time, I get angry and more or less tell him to cut this crap out, because I'm not doing anything and I don't know what he's talking about. He gets a weird look on his face and says, "I think I had a seizure in my sleep. The next time it happens, call an ambulance." And he leaves for a bit, only to start knocking again about an hour later, and when I open up, Kyle repeats the exact same story verbatim. This happens once more before I tell him to leave me the heck alone and leave for work. I go to work as normal and I am reluctant to return that night, but I'm too tired to switch to an alternate location. Big mistake. About 1 a.m., I wake up to slamming doors. Kyle is pacing back and forth between his bedroom, the living room, and out the front door, walking in and out of each room, turning the lights on and off, mumbling angrily and slamming the doors. I can see his figure pacing back and forth through the frosted window in my room that leads to the living room. Since my room is dark, he can't see inside. Suddenly, he screams, "I can't live like this. Why are you doing this to me?" I think he's on the phone and I don't respond. A few moments later, he screams my name repeatedly and I realize that he's directing it towards me. I knew I had to get the heck out of there. So I very quietly creep out of bed and start getting dressed and packing a bag of clothes for work in the morning. I'm almost done when he screams, "I hear you," and charges over to my room, slapping the wall next to my door and not touching the door itself. I look toward my window and I see his shadow lean all the way forward, pressing his ear up against the glass. I was terrified and sat completely still, unmoving. He eventually screams my name again and moves away from the window, and I hear him start pacing between rooms again. Now, my shoes are kept on a rack outside of my door, and not inside of my room. So I know that when I'm going to leave, I'm going to need to take a moment to put them on. I decide to wait until his pacing takes him out the front door again, at which time I plan to grab my shoes, put them on, and run. As I'm formulating this plan, the pacing stops. He screams, "Do you want to fight about this? Come out right now and we'll fight, I swear to God." Now, I'm a very small 5-foot girl, and this guy is easily 3 times my size, so I'm definitely not looking for a fight, thanks but no thanks. After a few minutes, he turns off all the lights and I hear the door to his room open and close, followed by silence. I wait for a moment to be sure that I can't hear any movement, and then I decide to take my chance. I took a deep breath and pulled my door open quietly. I step out and grab my shoes before I look up a second later, and I see him standing shirtless with just a pair of boxers and socks on in the dark of the hallway. His arms hung slightly outward in an awkward position. He says in a low, calm voice, "Ma'am, we need to talk." That was a hard no for me, so I grab my shoes and run out the door with them in hand. I run about a half block barefoot before I stop and put them on. When I look back, he's standing in the porch lights of our front door, watching me run but not moving. Luckily, I had a friend who lived 2 blocks away and I had their spare key, so I let myself in and I crashed there for the night. And that's where I stayed for the next week or so while we worked things out with the master tenant, and Kyle agreed to move out within the week. He said that he doesn't remember anything that happened, or wasn't sure if it was real or not. But if I said that's what went down, then it must be real. The day Kyle left, he sent me a photo of the house key sitting on the table and says, "I'm out, nothing else." I take a friend over there with me to scout it out and ensure that he actually left. And when we get there, we discover that not only had he left a ton of food and furniture, but he had ripped all the fire alarms out of the ceilings. He had unscrewed and removed the deadbolt to the front door, and left them lined up neatly on the front table. We then realized that my front door could only lock by using a key from the outside, and that it had been locked when we had arrived, meaning Kyle still had a key. We called a locksmith immediately. Even after changing the locks, I was still terrified to stay there alone afterwards, and never went to sleep at night without barricading the doors with chairs and other furniture. To this day, I still fear for his safety. He was obviously psychologically unstable, but I also wonder what could have happened if I hadn't been as lucky as I was. Hey, my name's Tom and I live in the St. Louis area. And this is a story about something that happened to me that almost ruined my life forever. When I was 21 years old, I broke up with my first ever serious girlfriend, who I had been together with for 8 months. Needless to say, I was devastated. I fell into a deep depression and I began abusing painkillers and Xanax really heavily, and I began looking for any girl that I could find a rebound with. I ended up looking on the personal section on Craigslist, and I found an ad for a girl named Stephanie. I began talking to her, and I had arranged for her to come pick me up on a night, and we had intercourse that night and decided to make it a regular thing. She was an older lady, about 35, and a bigger girl, but she had her own apartment and enough money to keep me loaded on as much drugs and alcohol as I wanted. And to be honest, I really just kind of used this lady. After a while, she grew really attached to me and started to want a more serious relationship. Eventually, she started dropping hints about wanting to get married. She said that she wanted to do this to help me out, so that she could get me on her insurance so I could get help with my drug and alcohol problem, which I refused to consider. One day, we got into a big argument and she told the police that I had been abusing her and got a temporary restraining order on me. A week after she did this, she called me crying her eyes out saying, "Please forgive me, I love you," and all that other stuff. and said that she wanted to come pick me up and buy me some dope and alcohol, and get me something to eat. And being the addict that I am, I of course accepted. From the moment that she had picked me up, I noticed that she was acting kind of odd. She was usually really talkative and was always on my butt wanting to talk to me about this and that. But this day, she was oddly quiet. And we got back to her apartment after I had walked in, and she immediately pushed me on the couch and pulled me down and started doing stuff. And then she climbed on top of me and began doing you know what. And she seemed angry when I didn't want to finish. I had been getting bad vibes off her the whole night, so after this happened, I immediately asked for a ride back home, which she quickly agreed to do. After I got dropped off at the house, I went inside and I sat down. My sister was watching SpongeBob, so I went and watched it with her. About 10 minutes after I had gotten home, I got a call on the phone. I picked it up, and to my surprise, a lady on the other end said that it was the St. Louis County Police Department, and that they were going to need me to come outside and talk for a second. I ran downstairs and hid my weed and my pills and then walked outside to figure out what the heck was going on. When I walked outside, there were about 7 different cops on the porch, and they were all pointing tasers at me. One of them hit me in the back of my leg with a nightstick and put me on the ground, and I was handcuffed. The cops then talked to my mom and got permission to go inside of the house, where they took a drug dog and began doing a thorough search of my room and my basement area. None of the cops on the scene would tell me what was going on whenever I would ask a question about why they were doing what they were. They told me that I would have to talk to the detective at the station. When I got to the police station, I had a bombshell dropped on me apparently. This lady had accused me of kidnapping her. She told the police that she had come by my house to return some of the stuff because we had just broken up. It was then that I had forced her by knife into her car, and that's when I kidnapped her. But thankfully, I had remembered that we made a couple of stops on the way to her apartment. She had gone inside of a gas station to get a couple of packs of cigarettes with me, so there was no way that I could have kidnapped her. The police still did a swab for DNA, and they also took my clothes for evidence, and I was forced to spend the rest of the night in the St. Louis County Jail, wearing nothing but hospital scrubs. I was released the next morning, but my ordeal was far from over. This lady began constantly stalking me. She would call me every night at odd times from blocked numbers, and either crying into the phone or just begging to talk to me. I also began seeing her vehicle quite a lot in the neighborhood, even though she lived nowhere near close to me. I called the police about this a couple of times, but they didn't really seem to care. They told me that I would have to get a restraining order on her in order to make it stop. I wanted nothing to do with the court system because I have a criminal record, and I just decided to ignore her, and I hoped that the problem would go away. After a couple months, she finally did stop bothering me as much. However, to this day, I sometimes get calls at 2 or 3 in the morning from blocked numbers. And every new girlfriend that I get, she will message them on Facebook and try to run them off. Moral of the story: be careful who you meet online. Whether you're a guy or a girl, all it takes is one crazy person to completely ruin your life. Hey guys, this is my first time posting. I thought I would tell a story about one of the more creepy encounters that I've had so far. At the time, I was a few months into undergrad in Austin, Texas, and had just become comfortable enough with myself to come out of the closet. At the time, there were no dating apps available, so to find dates I used Craigslist. It's a big mistake. I started chatting with a guy off Craigslist, Craig, and we headed off and decided to set a time and place for a date to meet in person. His ad said that he was 27 and I was 18 at the time. At first, he was insistent on meeting at his place, which I later found out was just a trailer. And it kind of made me suspicious, but in his pictures, he was very good looking. He had a nice smile, etc. so I decided to let it go. Eventually, we agreed to get coffee before going to his place. So, the day arrived and I went to get coffee and I was pretty excited. I had shown my roommates pictures of Craig and talked about how I was looking forward to meeting him. I showed up at the coffee shop and he was already there. He actually did look like his pictures, so that was a good start. We got coffee and ended up chatting for several hours before he asked whether I wanted to go back to his place. Luckily, my roommate called to check up on me, and it also happened that he was stranded because his car had broken down. So I told Craig that I would take my friend back home before heading over to his place. Well, by the time that I picked up my friend, etc., Craig was no longer answering his phone or text messages or anything. And when he finally answered, he accused me of making up some excuse so I wouldn't have to go back to his place. And basically, he was very angry and annoyed despite our great conversation earlier. I was a bit bummed, but basically didn't think of him again until years later, when my old roommate sent me a link for a news article about Craig. Apparently, he had been running a kidnapping operation using boys that he would lure through his good looks and promises. I can only imagine what would have happened to me if I had gone back to his trailer with him that day. And this happened a few years back when I was 23 and I was starting graduate school. I was new to the area and looking for an apartment. I'm not too picky, but on a grad school stipend, I needed something cheap. I was admittedly naive and decided to include some Craigslist postings in my search. I saw an ad for a one-bedroom apartment. I want to stress it was advertised as a one-bedroom, one-bathroom. Looking back, I should have known that it was too good to be true. A one-bedroom condo on the water with a fireplace and a dock for kayaks. It was huge. 2 floors and had a very nice up-to-date look for only $500 a month, most utilities included. In the ad, it was bolded, "Seeking woman tenants only." When I arrived, thankfully I was smart enough to bring my boyfriend. I was greeted at the door by a middle-aged man, about 55, in a stained tank top and boxers that stood a little too close. I immediately got an uneasy vibe from him. I wanted to leave then and there, but I felt obligated to see the place. He seemed very uncomfortable with my boyfriend being there, and mentioned that he usually just rents to women. I initially thought that he was just the landlord looking to find a tenant to lease to, until he mentioned that he was looking for a roommate to share the apartment, and that it was usually a 2-bedroom, 1-bath. He initially tried to have me come in alone to view the apartment while my boyfriend waited outside. However, I insisted on having him come along. As he showed me around the place, it was very dark and pretty empty. I remember thinking it was strange that he didn't have much furniture since he currently lives there. I can't explain fully, but the way that he showed me around the apartment felt as if he hadn't really planned on showing anyone around, and he kind of fumbled through each room. I would ask questions about how much certain utilities were, or rules of the lease, and he would have to think about it for a few seconds, and then he would answer like he'd never thought about it prior to that. The entire time he was standing very close to me. At one point my boyfriend asked him to give some space. When he showed me what would be my room, it was gross. The walls were peeling. There was a bed with a mattress covered in dark stains. It was very odd considering the rest of the apartment was in good shape. The weirdest part was that he would not let me see the bathroom. He said that there was some damage from the previous tenant that he needed to fix up. I think about it all the time. What was in there?